Biky Bones Presents Killer Samuel Little. Considered the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history, Samuel confessed to 93 murders, with only 50 confirmed. The FBI continues to seek the public's help in solving the remaining cases. Little's victims were often marginalized women, and his chilling sketches paired with detailed confessions provide clues to identify them. Join us as we uncover the unsolved cases and urge listeners to help bring justice. Like, follow, and subscribe to Biky Bones on Spotify, YouTube, and TikTok at Biky Bones. Let's get to the bare bones of it.
Welcome to this deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're going beyond the typical serial killer headlines.
Right.
And we're really going to explore the life and crimes of Samuel Little. This guy confessed to 93 murders.
Wow.
That number makes him potentially the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history.
Pretty scary.
It is.
Yeah.
We have a fascinating mix of sources for this deep dive.
Okay.
FBI reports, journalist accounts,
Right.
even Little's own words from prison interviews.
It's gonna be a disturbing case.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
And we're going to try to unpack how this could have gone on for so long, what allowed him to evade capture for decades.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's start with Little's early life.
Okay.
Abandoned as a baby, raised by his grandmother in Ohio.
Hmm.
What do we know about those formative years?
Well, his mother, Bessie May, abandoned him
Oh, wow.
just hours after his birth.
Jeez.
It was his grandmother, Fanny, who stepped in to raise him.
Okay.
The sources paint a picture of his grandparents as loving, but perhaps a little neglectful.
I see.
Yeah.
And there's this chilling detail about his early fascination with women's necks.
Oh,
It seems to have started in kindergarten.
wow.
He was fixated on his teacher,
Okay.
Mrs. Harris,
Yeah.
and how she would adjust her scarf,
Interesting.
touch her neck.
Yeah.
Later, he even mentioned a girl in his third grade class
Oh, wow.
with striking green eyes,
Yeah.
and he felt she was almost taunting him by touching her own neck.
It's a disturbingly specific
It is.
and recurring theme in his accounts.
Yeah, you have to wonder if this early fixation,
Right.
this fascination with the vulnerability of the neck,
Yeah.
was a precursor to his later crimes.
It's almost like,
It's like those roots.
yeah, the
Right.
roots of his violent tendencies
Right.
taking shape
Yeah.
right there in his childhood.
That's a really interesting point. And it's
Yeah.
not just the fascination with necks.
Right.
He also had a troubled childhood,
Yeah.
marked by theft and reform school.
Right. He was sent to the Ohio Boys Industrial School
Oh, wow.
at just 13 for stealing.
13.
Sadly, it seems that instead of rehabilitation,
Right.
he encountered more violence there.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
The sources describe a brutal environment
Yeah.
with physical punishments and even abuse among the boys.
Awful.
It feels like the opposite of what reform should be.
Yeah, it definitely seems like
Yeah.
it exacerbated his aggression
Uh,
and his desire for domination.
Then we have the introduction of true crime magazines into his life.
Oh, wow.
Specifically, his obsession with images of strangled women.
Jeez.
It's like a horrifying premonition of what's to come.
His fascination with necks,
Right?
his experiences with violence,
Yeah.
they all seem to converge in this disturbing fascination with strangulation.
And on top of that, he learns to box in reform school
Oh, jeez.
and becomes quite good at it,
Oh, no.
even winning the middleweight championship at the Ohio State Reformatory later on.
Oh.
So we see this physical power coupled with a growing darkness.
Very dangerous combination.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
His first adult arrest was for burglary,
Okay.
which landed him in prison for 3 years.
3 years.
But when he's released,
Yeah.
he doesn't turn his life around.
Right.
Instead, he hits the road and adopts a nomadic lifestyle,
Okay.
traveling from state to state.
And that's where we see his modus operandi taking shape.
Right.
He begins targeting vulnerable women,
Okay.
sex workers, drug addicts,
Yeah.
those living on the fringes of society.
I'm struck by his choice of victims.
Yeah.
It raises questions about how society views and protects these women.
Absolutely.
Their disappearances,
Right.
their lives,
Yeah.
often not given the same weight as others.
It's a tragic pattern we see with many serial killers.
Right.
These women are less likely to be reported missing,
Uh-huh.
and their cases are less likely to be thoroughly investigated.
And Little knew this and exploited it ruthlessly.
He did.
His method, strangulation, leaves minimal trace evidence,
Yeah.
making it even harder to catch him.
Unlike some of the more famous serial killers,
yeah.
like Bundy or Dahmer,
Right.
whose crimes were often performative and ritualistic,
Yeah.
Little's focus was solely on the act of strangulation itself.
Wow.
The control,
Yeah.
yeah, it was chillingly efficient
It was.
and tragically effective in helping him evade capture for so long.
His cross-country killing spree is a horrifying testament to that.
Yeah.
He was constantly moving,
Yeah.
committing crimes in multiple states.
Right.
The sources highlight some particularly disturbing cases,
Okay.
each one offering a glimpse into Little's brutality
Mhm.
and the failings of the system that allowed him to continue.
Let's start with his first confessed murder.
Okay.
Mary Brosley.
Okay.
He met her in Miami,
Mm-hmm.
strangled her,
Wow.
and dumped her body in the Everglades.
Oh my God.
The sheer callousness of it is just staggering.
It is. And because Brosley was an alcoholic, her death was initially attributed to alcohol poisoning
Yeah.
and wasn't even investigated as a homicide.
Just awful.
Another life dismissed.
Another crime overlooked.
Right.
Then there's Agatha White Buffalo,
Okay.
a Native American woman
Yeah.
struggling with addiction.
Mhm.
Little lured her away with the promise of help,
Oh, wow.
only to kill her and leave her body in a ditch.
Heartbreaking.
It is.
It's a clear pattern of deception.
It is.
Preying on women who are already struggling, making them easy targets.
Right.
And sadly, their disappearances weren't treated with the urgency they deserve.
No, they weren't.
One of the most disturbing stories
Okay.
is about Hilda Nelson,
Uh-huh.
a surviving victim.
Wow.
She was attacked in her room by Little,
Oh, jeez.
but was saved when someone knocked on the door.
It's chilling to think how close she came to death.
I know.
How random it all seemed.
Yeah,
And yet, even with a survivor willing to testify,
right.
the justice system failed.
Oh
The
my.
case never went to trial.
Wow.
Little walked free.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
It had devastating consequences.
Right.
We see the same pattern with Melinda Lepre's case.
Okay.
Little was brought to trial for her murder,
Mm.
but was acquitted
Wow.
due to unreliable witnesses.
No.
Lepre was a sex worker.
Yeah.
And as we've discussed, her testimony wasn't given the weight it should have been.
Right.
The system failed her,
Yeah.
just as it failed countless others.
It's a heartbreaking pattern.
It is.
And it wasn't just the lack of attention given to these cases.
Yeah.
Little himself was incredibly good at evading capture.
He was.
He was arrested over 100 times,
Wow.
but only served around 10 years in prison.
Yeah, it's hard to believe.
It is.
Yeah.
It was a perfect storm of factors.
It was.
His ability to manipulate people,
Uh-huh.
the lack of forensic technology in the early years,
Right.
and the systemic biases against his victims.
Yeah,
It all worked in his favor.
it did.
One instance that really stands out is the Patricia Mount case.
Uh-huh.
Little was acquitted,
Yeah.
despite evidence,
Oh, wow.
largely due to his girlfriend Jean Dorsey
Right.
providing a false alibi.
Dorsey played a significant role in Little's crime,
She did.
helping him dispose of evidence.
Right.
And even, according to some sources,
Wow.
committing murder herself.
It's chilling to think about the role she played in all of this.
It is.
And then we have Little's charm and his ability to manipulate people,
Yeah.
especially women.
Right.
He knew how to present himself as harmless to
Yeah.
deflect suspicion.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable how many close calls he had,
It is.
how many times he was almost caught,
Right.
and yet he slipped through the net again and again,
He did?
leaving a trail of devastation that would take decades to fully uncover.
Yeah, a really dark chapter in American history.
It is.
One we're still trying to understand.
Right. And that brings us to 2012 when Little is finally caught.
Yeah.
It's a drug charge that leads to his DNA being linked to cold cases, and everything starts to unravel from there.
It's fascinating how seemingly unrelated events can sometimes lead to major breakthroughs
Yeah.
in a case like this.
It is.
Yeah.
And the source material highlights the incredible work of Detective Mitzi Roberts and Texas Ranger James Holland.
Right.
It was their dedication
Yeah.
and their unique approach that finally got Little to confess.
They understood they were dealing with a narcissistic personality.
Right.
So instead of focusing on traditional interrogation tactics,
Mhm.
they appealed to Little's ego,
Okay.
made him feel important, like he was the smartest person in the room.
And it worked.
It did.
Little, it seems, was willing to talk, but only on his own terms.
Wow.
He struck a bizarre bargain.
What was that?
He'd confess in exchange for being moved to a specific prison.
It speaks to his need for control,
Yeah.
even from behind bars.
Right.
He wanted to dictate the terms of his own capture in a way.
And then there are the drawings. He created these detailed portraits of his victims while in prison.
Those drawings are both chilling and fascinating.
Yeah.
They showcase his disturbingly good memory for details.
Right.
And perhaps, as you said earlier, a twisted desire for recognition.
It's hard to say what motivated him to create those portraits.
Oh, I know.
But they became a crucial tool for law enforcement in identifying victims and connecting Little's confessions to actual cases.
Imagine being a detective.
Right.
Working on a cold case for years.
Yeah.
And suddenly you see one of Little's drawings.
Yeah.
That perfectly matches a victim you've been searching for.
Right.
It must have been an incredible,
It is.
but also incredibly disturbing moment.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to grasp the mix of emotions that must have evoked for everyone involved.
Yeah.
The investigators, the families of the victims.
Absolutely.
Little's confessions brought closure for some,
Uh-huh.
but they also reopened old wounds.
Right.
The pain of knowing,
Right.
of having those horrific details confirmed must have been overwhelming.
It's a complicated legacy.
It is.
And one that continues to this day.
Yeah.
Even with Little's death in 2020.
Right.
The investigation isn't over.
Right.
The FBI is still working to confirm his remaining confessions and connect them to unsolved cases.
They've even released details on 5 specific cases they're actively seeking information on.
Wow.
It's a reminder that even with so many confessions,
Yeah.
there might be more victims out there,
Right.
more families who are still searching for answers.
I think it's important for listeners to understand
Yeah.
that Little's crimes had a ripple effect,
Absolutely.
impacting not just the victims, but their families,
Right.
their communities, and law enforcement agencies across the country.
Right.
We're still piecing together the full extent
Yeah.
of his horrific legacy.
And we haven't even touched on the role of Gillian Lauren,
Oh, that's right.
the true crime writer,
Yeah.
who formed a complex and unsettling relationship with Little.
She played a pivotal role in this story.
She did.
It wasn't just about writing a book.
Right.
It was about getting answers,
Mm-hmm.
seeking justice for the victims.
Her book, Behold the Monster, details her interactions with Little.
Yeah.
She spent countless hours interviewing him in prison,
Wow.
becoming his confidant in a way to
Right.
extract information and try to understand his motives.
It's hard to imagine the emotional toll that must have taken on her.
It is.
To sit across from a man
Right.
who had committed such horrific acts,
Yeah.
to listen to him talk about his crimes,
Uh-huh.
to try to delve into his psyche.
And most importantly, she played a crucial role in identifying victims whose cases were lost in the system.
Yeah.
Little would give her details,
Oh.
sometimes vague,
Right.
and Lauren would painstakingly sift through records,
Wow.
old news clippings, anything she could find,
Yeah.
to try to match his confessions to real women.
It's remarkable.
It is.
She essentially became an amateur detective, using her skills as a writer and researcher
Yeah.
to give those women back their names,
Right.
their stories.
Uh-huh.
She helped restore their humanity in the face of such dehumanizing violence.
Her dedication is incredible.
It is.
But it also raises questions about the ethical lines we navigate
Right.
when dealing with someone like Little.
Yeah.
Was it right to engage with him so deeply, to
Right.
potentially feed his ego,
Yeah.
to give him the attention he craved?
It's a complex moral dilemma.
It is.
On the one hand, you have the potential to bring closure to families
Right.
and help solve cold cases.
Yeah.
On the other hand,
Yeah.
you're interacting with a man who revels in his crimes,
Right.
who might be manipulating the situation to his advantage.
It's a tightrope walk.
It is.
I think Lauren acknowledges that complexity in her work,
Mhm.
leaving the reader
Right.
and us as listeners
Yeah.
to ponder those lines,
Right.
those choices.
And that brings us to another twist in this story.
Okay.
A development that some might find quite unsettling.
Oh,
Zach Bagans,
great.
the paranormal investigator,
Uh-huh.
acquired Little's remains and belongings
Wow.
for his haunted museum in Las Vegas.
Including those chilling portraits we talked about earlier.
It adds a layer of,
Yeah.
well, exploitation, I suppose,
Yeah.
on top of everything else.
It does make you wonder where it all ends.
Right.
Does the fascination with true crime,
Uh-huh.
the desire to understand the darkness, ever cross a line?
Yeah.
When does the exploitation of these tragedies stop?
It's a question that lingers
Yeah.
long after you've delved into a case like this.
So after all of this, after this deep dive into the life and crimes of Samuel Little,
Right.
what does it all mean?
Right.
What are we left with?
It's a question that begs for reflection.
It does.
His case lays bare so many cracks in our system.
Yeah.
How we treat marginalized communities,
Right.
how we investigate crimes,
Mhm.
and how biases,
Yeah.
both conscious and unconscious,
Right.
can lead to justice being delayed or denied.
Little's story forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths
It does.
and ask ourselves how we can do better.
Absolutely.
How can we ensure that every life,
Yeah.
every victim is given the attention and respect they deserve.
And how can we ensure that those who prey on the vulnerable are brought to justice swiftly and fairly?
Those are the questions we need to grapple with.
They are?
And on that note, I think it's time to leave our listeners with a provocative thought to chew on.
Okay.
Little targeted women's society often overlooked.
Right.
Does this make his crimes more monstrous? Or is all murder equally horrific?
It's a difficult question to answer,
It is.
but it's one we need to ask ourselves.
Yeah.
And where does our responsibility lie
Right.
to those on the fringes, those whose voices are often silenced?
Those are the questions we need to consider
Right.
as we move forward.
Yeah.
We can't bring back the victims,
No, we can't.
but we can learn from their stories.
Absolutely.
And we can work to create a world where such horrors are less likely to occur.
That's the challenge.
It is.
And that's the hope we take away from this deep dive.
We've spent a lot of time unpacking the specifics of Samuel Little's case.
Yeah, his early life, his methods,
Right.
the systemic failures that allowed him to evade justice for so long.
It's a heavy story, to say the least.
It is, yeah.
But before we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay,
I think it's valuable to kind of zoom out a bit
right.
to look at Little in the context of other infamous serial killers,
Okay, yeah. I like that.
to see where he fits in
Right.
into that larger, terrifying landscape.
Exactly. It's easy to get lost
Right.
in the sheer number of his victims.
It is.
93 confessed murders.
Yeah.
It's almost incomprehensible.
Yeah.
But comparing him to others,
Right.
examining those differences in motivation and method
Yeah.
can give us deeper insights.
It can.
Okay, so who should we start with? Maybe the most notorious of them all.
Ted Bundy.
Good choice.
Bundy was, as you said, notorious,
Yeah.
charismatic, intelligent, manipulative.
Yeah.
He often targeted young women,
Right.
college students,
Uh-huh.
and lured them into a sense of security before attacking.
Yeah, his crimes were marked by a level of sadism,
Right.
of ritual that we don't really see with Little.
Right.
Bundy seemed driven by a need to control,
Yeah.
to torture his victims,
Right.
both physically and psychologically.
Whereas Little, as we've discussed, was fixated
Right.
on the act of strangulation itself.
The power
Yeah.
over life and death.
Right.
The vulnerability of the neck.
It was efficient,
It was.
almost detached in a way.
Yeah, and tragically, that efficiency helped him evade capture for so long.
What about Gary Ridgway,
Okay,
the Green River Killer?
right.
He confessed to 71 murders.
Like Little, he targeted vulnerable women,
Right.
sex workers in particular, and his crimes spanned a long period of time.
But the sources suggest his motives were different.
Okay, how so?
Ridgway seemed driven by hatred, a desire to punish and degrade.
While Little disturbingly claimed to have loved his victims.
Oh, wow.
A twisted rationalization, of course.
Like he was doing them a favor.
Yeah.
It's hard to wrap your head around that level of delusion.
It is.
Then there's John Wayne Gacy,
Oh.
the killer clown
Yeah.
who murdered at least 33 young men and boys.
He often posed as a police officer or a clown to lure his victims,
Right.
burying many of them in the crawl space of his home.
Gacy's crimes were marked by premeditation,
Right.
meticulous planning.
Yeah, we don't really see that with Little.
Right.
His crimes seem more opportunistic,
Right.
seizing a moment
Yeah.
when a vulnerable woman crossed his path.
And that nomadic lifestyle, that
Yeah,
constant movement across state lines, made it even harder for law enforcement to connect the dots.
It did.
So where does Little fit into this spectrum of evil?
That's the question.
What makes him stand out?
I think it's the sheer scale of his crimes.
Yeah.
Potentially the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history.
And the way he exploited societal biases,
Right.
targeting women who were often overlooked,
Uh-huh.
their disappearances not fully investigated.
It's a sobering reminder that justice isn't always blind.
Right.
Prejudice has consequences,
Yeah.
sometimes deadly ones.
And it underscores our responsibility
It's a-
to speak up for the vulnerable,
Yes,
to demand justice for those whose voices are often silenced.
absolutely.
It's a difficult story to grapple with, no doubt,
It is.
but it's one we can't afford to ignore.
Right.
I think this deep dive has revealed so much,
It has.
not only about Samuel Little,
Uh-huh.
but about ourselves.
Yeah, that's right.
But understanding this darkness,
Right.
by learning from the mistakes of the past,
Mhm.
we can work toward preventing future tragedies.
Hopefully.
It's a tall order,
It is.
but it's the responsibility we carry with us